Good morning, everyone. Welcome back to Virtual Sunday School. So this week I'm on the road again, and I am here with my friend, Elizabeth. All right, let's go check out our story.
Hi, my name is Elizabeth. I'm in 3rd grade, and our lesson for the week is Esther's Bravery.
So our story today, as Elizabeth said, is about Esther. So Esther is going to be one of the figures there. There's Esther. And then Esther had a really close companion, and his name was Mordecai. So that's Mordecai. So a long time ago in the Old Testament, Esther, before she was married, was taken to the palace by Mordecai because the king was looking for a wife. So there's the king. And so Esther came, and the king thought she was just stunning and wanted to marry her. So Esther and the king were married. So you see Esther has a crown on now. Yeah. So after they were married, the king would go to his separate area and do king type things. And Esther would be in the palace with her loyal confidant Mordecai, whereas the king would be with his loyal confidant Haman. So those are the two other people in our story. Awesome. And so Esther and Mordecai were talking one day, and Mordecai whispered into Esther's ear and told her about a plot that someone had to kill the king. So Esther was so afraid that she ran over to the king and she told him all about it. All right, well, the king was so thankful for Esther and for Mordecai that his life was truly saved and they were able to save him, and that the queen went back to Mordecai and told him that the king was so pleased and was so thankful, and it was a really wonderful thing. So later, the king promoted a man named Haman, who we just talked about. So Haman was one of his, one of his friends. And Haman was the highest position in the kingdom and ordered all his officials and all the people to honor him by kneeling before him every single time he passed by. So Mordecai was the only person who didn't really like Haman that much. So Haman would walk around the castle and the palace, and he would want for other people to bow before him. So the first person would bow, but then when he got to Mordecai refused to bow before him because he said he was Jewish. So Mordecai was Jewish, and this made it impossible for him to bow to someone other than God. And Haman got so furious. He got so angry that he decided he was going to write a law about this, and he stormed off. Because Haman was so furious, he made a new law, and he sent it to the king, and he had the king seal the law and then read it throughout the land. So we're going to open up this scroll, and we are going to read because Mordecai was so unwilling to bow to Haman, Haman decided to say, "In all the king's provinces, all Jews, young and old, women and children, are to be destroyed and killed, and their goods plundered on the 13th day of the 12th month." Wow. So Haman decided he wanted all the Jewish people to be killed. Mordecai was so worried he couldn't believe that Haman was going to kill all the Jewish people. He sent word for Esther, and Esther came out to talk with him about that, because what the secret was is Esther was also Jewish, and the king did not know. So Mordecai said to Esther, "Why don't you go before the king, because you're the one who can, and you could ask him to not kill the Jewish people." Esther wasn't sure if she could do that. She was really afraid almost to talk to the king about that, because she was afraid she would also die. But she said, "What if I go back and try?" But Mordecai replied, "Esther, you will die with your people unless you act. Perhaps you were made queen for such a time as this." So then Esther decided to be brave and agreed to go to the king and asked if the people could not die. So Esther decided she would go before the king. So when she appeared before the king at risk of her own life, the king received her, and Esther then asked, she said, would you and Haman come to dinner? She would prepare a meal that evening, and the king gladly agreed. So the three of them walked into the palace and had dinner together. After the meal, the king asked for Esther's request because the king didn't know what her request would be. Esther said she would make her request later if the king and Haman would return for another dinner. So they all left the dinner table agreeing that they were going to come back again tomorrow. So later that night, the king could not sleep. He was wondering what Esther wanted to talk with him about. And while he couldn't sleep, he had someone read to him the book of the kingdom, and he realized he had not honored Mordecai for saving his life earlier. So he decided he would honor Mordecai. The next morning, the king went to meet Haman outside of the tower. And when he met him, he saw that Haman had built a hanging tower for the Jews to die, which is kind of sad a little bit, you know? But before Haman could ask the king, because Haman did not like Mordecai just as much as Mordecai didn't really like Haman. Well, Haman was going to ask if the king would hang Mordecai first, but before he could, the king said that he really wanted to honor Mordecai for saving his life. Haman, who was a little upset, agreed that he would find Haman and honor him and take him around the city. So Mordecai was on a horse and led by Haman across the city so everyone could honor him and be thankful for the way that he saved the king's life. That evening, Esther had a second dinner for the king and Haman. And she took them there and she said, are you all ready for dinner? They said yes, and so they joined her happily for dinner. That night, Esther turned to the king and she told him, she said, I am Jewish. And she asked him to save her people from being killed. Please, please, please do not kill these people. Esther was so sad and was so apologetic, and she blamed Haman for the cruel law. And once the king realized what Haman had done, he decided to order Haman to be kicked out. He was done. So Haman was gone and out of the palace. Perfect. Never to return again. After that, the king apologized for Esther, and he felt so bad that he brought Mordecai to the palace. He wanted to talk with Mordecai and to thank him. So as Mordecai came and made his way to have dinner with them, the king officially offered him the highest position in the kingdom beside, of course, the king. And he gave Mordecai permission to make a law that would save the Jewish people. Yay! That's awesome. So Elizabeth's going to open our scroll right now as we celebrate how brave Esther was. Esther could have also died with the rest of the Jewish people, but instead she stood up for what she believed in, and she saved not only her friend and herself, but the rest of the people who were Jewish in that world. So Mordecai wrote this law on the scroll. Perfect. And it says, on the 13th day, the 12th month, the Jews in every city and province will be allowed to get together and defend themselves and will not perish. So after the Jews were saved and they felt their power restored, Mordecai sent letters to each and every one of them telling them to celebrate their victory. It truly was a day to celebrate. Even Queen Esther supported Mordecai's letter, and she wrote a letter of her own. So here's her scroll, and Elizabeth is going to open it up, and she wanted to also celebrate. So she established the celebration as the festival of Purim, which is called the Lot. So it's actually something that a lot of Jewish people celebrate still today. And it says, "We pray that all of you will live in peace and safety. You must remember to celebrate Purim at the time and in the way that we have said." And they had a big old party to celebrate. That's right. And they also used the dreidel. Do you see the dreidel over there? So that's where the dreidel came. So they would use this dreidel to spin and to celebrate. And it was a fun game. It was a really fun game. And it was just a wonderful way to celebrate the ways that the Jewish people would be safe and also how Esther had been brave. Well, Elizabeth, thank you so much for helping teach our story today. I love this story of Esther for several reasons. Number one is because Esther is one of the only women in the Bible that we really learn about early on who was brave. So in the Old Testament, all the stories we hear about for the most part are about men, but Esther's one of the first ones we hear that's about a woman. So for me, that's pretty cool because it's kind of like a female superhero in the Bible. And so Esther was so brave that she saved all these other people instead of saving herself, because she could have not said anything and she would have been saved because the king didn't know she was Jewish, but the rest of the other people would have died, which I feel like she made the right choice, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think so. So, Elizabeth, let's talk about bravery a little bit. What do you think about when you think of being brave?
Climbing a tree, and when you fall and you don't cry.
Oh, that's a good one. So maybe climbing a tree even just by itself is being brave.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe if you fell and you hurt yourself and you didn't like scream a lot, you could be brave. Yeah, that's a good one. I like that.
Or going to virtual school.
Yeah, going to virtual school, that's definitely one. Going to virtual school is being brave because you may not like virtual school, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Going to virtual school is hard.
Yeah.
I don't like it, really.
Me neither.
Yeah. But you know what? You do it, right?
Mm-hmm.
You get up and you do it, and that's brave. So I think you're really brave for doing that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, friends, I want you all to think about what are ways you can be brave this week. What are things you can do in your life that'll help you be brave and show other people how you're brave? Do you have any other ideas you think of?
No.
No? Yeah. Well, why don't you all think of some ideas and maybe share them with us and help us know? Oh, you've got another one? What you think?
Not screaming on a roller coaster. That's 2020 the biggest roller coaster in the world.
That is a good one. Have you ever been on a roller coaster before?
2 times.
Yeah, I've been on a roller coaster, and it's almost impossible to not scream because it's really fun, but also like a little scary.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a good one, to not scream on a roller coaster. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Maybe being brave is doing something you don't want to do necessarily, but doing it anyways, because you know that by doing it, it's a good thing. Like going to school, even if you don't love it on the virtual computer, you know? That's a good one. All right, friends, well, I hope you think of some good ideas of ways you can be brave this week. And next week, I am going to do like I did last week, and I'm going to reenact our story again in a really funny and silly way. So I hope to see you all later. Bye!
Good morning, everybody. Today we're talking about Esther and bravery. And while I was getting ready this week, I read a little bit about bravery. I am reading the book, The One and Only Bob. It's the sequel to The One and Only Ivan, but it's written by Bob. The little dog is talking in this book. And there's a chapter called Brave. I'm going to read you just a little bit. Bob says, "Once, when we were still at the mall, I told Ivan how brave I thought he was. The way he put up with everything that had happened to him and never stopped being a good guy." Ivan just looked at me, cocked that big old head of his, nodded a bit. "That's not brave, Bob," he said finally. "That's just knowing what I can't change." "I call it brave," I said. "I call it crazy brave." "It seems to me there are lots of ways to be brave, Bob," Ivan said. And I think that's really true. There's a lot of ways to be brave. It reminded me of an experience I had this summer. My family and I went out to a lake, and at this lake there were some jumping rocks. So the lake was really deep, and there were some rocks that stood out a little bit, so you could climb up, just kind of a hiking path, climb up and stand at the top of this rock and use it like a diving board to jump into the water. So there were some that my kids and I jumped off of. And we got to another one just back in a little space. And we saw a lot of kids climbing up. And this one was really high, probably 15 feet high. And this one, when you jumped off of it, you had to be careful about where you landed, because there was only one space that was a good deep part of water. If you jumped on the wrong side, it would be too shallow and you could get hurt jumping someplace that was shallow. So we saw kids climbing up there and jumping off, and we knew that we didn't want to do it. So we thought, wow, the kids who are climbing up and jumping off, like, that's kind of scary to do. And so they were really being brave doing that. And then we saw another kid. These kids were probably kind of bigger kids, probably not driving their own cars yet, maybe 14 or 15 years old. And a whole line of them were going up and climbing and jumping, and everybody was cheering, and the kids were yelling for each other. And then there was one kid, a guy, and he started at the bottom, and all of his friends were like, oh, come on up, jump, come on, do it. And everybody kept telling him that. And the kid stood at the bottom, and he said, no, I don't care about the jumping, but climbing up is not my thing. Kind of freaks me out. I'm not going to do it. And he turned around and he went back to the boat. And when I saw him do that, I thought, you know what? It takes a lot of bravery to climb up someplace and jump off. You're kind of nervous looking down. That takes a lot of bravery. It takes bravery for me just to go off the regular diving board sometimes. But I think it also takes a lot of bravery when all of your friends are saying, come on, just do it, and all of your friends are doing something. I think it took a lot of bravery for that kid to know in his heart, I don't like climbing up places like that. I'm not going to do it. I don't care what my friends say. I don't want to do that. So everyone there showed bravery. Some kids showed bravery by doing something big. And some kids showed bravery by knowing what felt good and right in their hearts and not doing it. And there was no right or wrong in it, but each kid showed bravery by following what they wanted to do in their heart. So I think as you go forward this week, look for some things that you use bravery for. For some people, being brave this week might be speaking up on a Zoom call, because sometimes some people find that intimidating and uncomfortable. Some people might be showing bravery by having a change in their school schedule, going back in person, dealing with another different schedule. Some people might be showing bravery by going back but not having friends with them, having friends who are still at home, things like that. Some people might be being brave by getting up and putting their feet on the ground and doing the same thing they've done every other day, but it takes a little more that day. So this week, look for ways that you can be brave. And when you feel that being brave, when you feel that doing something that your heart says is a little hard, but you're doing what you know your heart says you need to do, make sure you give yourself a little pat on the back for that, because that's important to do. I'll see you next week. Bye-bye.